Hola, mis amigos.
Hola.
That's about all the Spanish we'll have, but thank you so much for coming. So today, this will be a conversation amongst friends. So if you are here, we ask you to be present, for you to engage with your own personal stories as human beings. And for us, this is a conversation amongst friends in terms of the world we want to see, not just in coffee, but generally speaking, what does it look like to really prioritize people first? So a really small intro, and then we're going to go into our stories. So like Jennifer mentioned, my name is Melissa Villanueva, and I'm the owner and CEO of Brewpoint Coffee. My little intro is, have you ever looked on Craigslist for an espresso machine, but only to buy a coffee shop instead? Because that is the story of Brewpoint. And I'll tell you a lot more about it very soon, but I'm going to just intro Josh right now.
My name is Joshua Brandt. I work for Higher Grounds Trading Company, a coffee roaster in Traverse City, Michigan. We're also member owners of Cooperative Coffees, an importing cooperative. And I don't want to work in the coffee industry if it doesn't support everyone along the supply chain.
Fantastic. So at the core of this talk together, we're really thinking through, what does it mean to do community building? What does it mean to be a human-centered business? Because a lot of us, when we get into the coffee business or whether or not we have business experience, there's a lot of protocols through business that we're taught that are just standard, that at the end of the day really don't prioritize people first. And so at the core, we believe that it makes sense that if you are a person in power, that we want to see you critically thinking about the protocols you have in place, and do they prioritize people, do they prioritize the business, and how do you find that balance? So for us, community building is a mosaic of individual human stories. You build community by being authentically human and inviting others to do the same. So we're going to talk about our stories, but as we do, we want to hear yours. We want you to be thinking about your stories as well, and we want to hear your stories afterwards when we get to meet you in person. So Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Sure. So I got into the coffee industry in 2014. As Jennifer mentioned, I had been working in politics. I had chosen to work in politics for a state senator that I believed in because I thought that would be the best way for me to have a positive impact on other people's lives. I never thought I'd work for a for-profit company. But we have term limits in Michigan, so the state senator that I was working for, he came to the end of his term, he could no longer hold office, and although I had had a lot of really interesting and positive experiences, I also found that work to be somewhat frustrating, because government is sometimes frustrating, and I decided that I wanted to try and find something else to do. So while I looked for additional full-time work, I got a part-time job as a barista in a coffee shop in Traverse City. And it was there that I met Chris Treater, the owner of Higher Grounds. He came in to talk to the owner of the coffee shop, and he started telling us about his company. And I learned about Higher Grounds, how he had started the company kind of backwards. He had traveled to Chiapas, Mexico to do his master's thesis in graduate school, had no intention of ever getting into the coffee industry. But while he was doing that work there, he developed deep and lasting relationships with the communities, the indigenous communities where he was doing the work. And when it was time for him to leave, he asked, how can I continue to stay engaged and help the community? And they told him, you can find someone to buy our coffee. So he returned to the United States, again, never thinking that he would get into the coffee industry, but respecting what he'd been asked to help to do. And he had some difficulty at first trying to find a buyer for the coffee, so he eventually decided that he would do it himself. And he started buying coffee from My Vinique, the community where he had spent time, and roasting it in the garage in Traverse City and selling it at farmers markets. And years went by with more and more people learning the story of Higher Grounds and what he was trying to do with the coffee to support the communities he had visited, and it took off from there. Eventually, Higher Grounds started a nonprofit that does work in the communities where we source our coffee, and we also became a member of Cooperative Coffees, which is a cooperatively operated importer in the United States. 23 member roasters that are about the same size as us, and certainly were founded with similar values, are coming together to create the buying power that's necessary in order to actually import the coffee ourselves. And what that lets us do is establish long-term relationships with producer partners. Most of the communities we source from, we've been working with them for 10 to 15 years. And it also allows us to extend contracts that have the roasters committing to coffee 12 months in advance, and just recently we started committing to 50% of so if we contract 12 months in advance for next year's harvest, then we are also committing to 50% at the same level for the following year. So contracts that are actually committed 24 months in advance. And those relationships just go a long way towards ensuring that we're paying a higher than fair trade price for the coffee that we're sourcing, that we understand the needs of the community and that they understand our needs, and we become a network of family. So Higher Grounds has been able to make an impact in a way that I never thought a for-profit business could. It's been a very meaningful experience for me.
I've gotten to know Josh and Higher Grounds throughout the single origin trip, and I think what really stood out to me is that oftentimes, people, especially from the U.S., like we go to other countries, we make relationships, we try to help, but we come back and we go back into our own world. Like, how often is it that someone sees a major issue happening in a different country and commits to that relationship and commits to the people that they've seen and the issues that they're going through? And I mean, getting to know Josh and getting to know Higher Grounds, it was story after story of like different situations in which you've committed to building better lives for the people that aren't always right in front of you. And so, do you have any other stories like that you'd want to highlight?
Well, but within 3 months of having started for Higher Grounds, I was in Africa helping to organize the first international cupping in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and starting a gender equity project that taught financial literacy in the communities where we were sourcing the Congolese coffee. And we're a tiny roaster. We only have 23 employees. The fact that was happening, that we were able to pull that off, was only by virtue of having built relationships with other large organizations. It was just a testament to how collaboration and community building is the only way that those large impact events can take place.
Yeah, absolutely. So my story, I'm going to go a little bit personal and then segue into Brewpoint. So like I said, Melissa, at 5 years old, I think I had this entrepreneurial gene. My dad loves it when I tell this story about how he came home one day and there was a for sale sign in front of our house. And he saw arrows pointing through the door all the way up the stairs into my bedroom. And I had marked all my toys with different price tags. And with his nerves, he was just like, Melissa, so did anyone come through today? And I very sadly was just like, no, but maybe tomorrow. And he said, no, there's no tomorrow of you trying to sell things in your room. And so very young, I had this mindset of, I kind of wanted to do things the way that I wanted to do things, how I wanted to do things. But being a brown girl, growing up in very white communities, very quickly assimilated. I knew that in order to be successful, I had to change myself to be a part of the larger community, to feel like I had a place of belonging. And so throughout middle school, high school, I went to 12 different schools, so I had 12 different opportunities to remake myself, to figure out how to be successful and kind of navigate a predominantly white world in the US. And so I, in college, was a philosophy major, ended up doing door-to-door sales during college to pay off my loans, and was weirdly good at it. I was number 4 in the country. And so when I graduated, I got business offers. I was a director of recruitment and team development for a financial company for 3 years. And in both the door-to-door sales and in the financial institution, I talked to my bosses because I would get really bought in and do really well at my job, and then over time felt like there was a misalignment of values. And when I would go to them, I would say, here's what we say our values are, but I don't see it through the way that our structure works. And they would tell me that the world doesn't work that way. You think about things too black and white. In order to have a business or run a business, you can't think that way. And so when I was 3 years into my financial job, I met my now husband, And my first conversation with him, he noted that I was in a stage of waiting for a sign to tell me that I should move on to my next thing. And he told me, sometimes you just got to pull the trigger. And I took that as my sign and quit my job the next day. He thought he ruined my life, but I was pretty happy. I ended up going to the Philippines. I'm Filipino American, and really was there to do a self-discovery trip. And so while I was there, I got caught by this vision to open a coffee shop because coffee shops are great for community building. And while I was there, I decided that I wanted to put a 3-year plan together. I wanted to be really responsible in terms of business planning. And my first week coming back from the Philippines to do business planning, I was looking on Craigslist to look for an espresso machine. Ended up finding this coffee shop in a small town outside of Chicago instead. And within 1 month, me and my 7-month boyfriend ended up buying this shop together. Had no idea what we were doing, but we were really dedicated to getting a little bit better every single day. So fast forward 8 years later, we now have 4 coffee shops, a coffee roastery, an event space. I'm the co-author of a book called Starting and Running a Coffee Shop, but the interest that I really have has to do with economic development. So how do coffee shops like ours impact the local community? And how do supply chains for businesses like ours that have global supply chains affect the global community? And so, that's like a little bit of our story in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. But as we move forward, like when we think about being business owners, when we think about being people who have some level of power in the communities that we have, we realize that in a world that is, kind of scary, right? There's so many things that we have no control of, but we have this ecosystem within our businesses where we get to define the world that we want to see. So, with that being said, we're going to talk through a little bit about what is the vision of the world that we want to see. So, as I was saying, for me, through my story, I think what's really important for me is 3 words: belonging, inclusivity, and equity. So belonging for me is, the belonging that I sought growing up as a kid. I want to be able to provide that for my staff and my vendors and for my customers through the coffee shops that we have. Inclusion means really inviting people into that. And, sometimes we come with our guards up, but how do we really invite people to let those guards down and treat each other like humans? And the equity standpoint really comes with wanting to see thoughtfulness throughout this whole supply chain. So to give a couple of different examples for myself, so I don't know about everyone here, but the pandemic was not so fun. And so I have 2 examples of what does it mean to be a business that can put people first while still being profitable and sustainable. So one example I have is for my staff. I'm not sure what it's like globally, but in the US right now, staffing is very difficult at coffee shops. And so, but when the pandemic first hit, I think what really secured a very tight culture for my team was when everything hit, we had 3 shops at that point. We consolidated to 1. And we talked to the whole team and essentially said, okay, this is how many hours we have. How can we divide and conquer so that anyone who needs work can work? And everyone on the team essentially was able to say, okay, in order for me to make enough money to make ends meet, here's how many hours I need. And we were able to start off the pandemic and go through the whole pandemic without having to let anyone go. Because there was this camaraderie amongst my team to define how many hours each person needed in order to be in an okay spot. The second example I would give in terms of the world that I want to see in a very micro example within my business is, I'm not sure, I know that oat milk is something that is very popular. And so Oatly is a brand that got really popular during the pandemic or maybe even beforehand. And with all the supply chain issues, especially the now, but also the first couple years in the pandemic, we were chosen to be one of 3 businesses that actually get to have Oatly milk. And we're by no means a huge business. It was like the 2 other businesses that got it were Intelligentsia and La Colombe, which are like much bigger than Brewpoint. But the distributor essentially said, hey, throughout the whole pandemic, you never yelled at us. You never, like, you always treated us really thoughtfully. You always wanted us to make sure it was a win-win for both parties, so we're choosing you to have this product. And so all that being said, for me, the vision of the world I want to see, I don't think being able to be a profitable business and a people-first business is mutually exclusive. I think that you really can have both and end up finding really synergistic partners and be able to build that world that you want to see. So that's a little bit about Brewpoint. So tell me a little bit about High Grounds.
I think the pandemic is a great example of how the sort of trust and relationships that can be built through a human-centric business can help everybody get through. Yeah. We face a similar situation with our cafe staff, but with cooperative coffees, we're all members, those 23 roasters of Importer, but we're all family as well. Mm-hmm. And we benefit from exchanging ideas. There are some members who have gone through things that others haven't, and they're completely open and helpful. Whereas some folks might even, like, there are other members of cooperative coffees that sell coffee in the same town that we sell coffee in, and traditionally we'd be seen as competitors, but because we have that familiar relationship, we understand that we are better together and that we can exchange ideas and support one another. Mm-hmm. So during the pandemic, there were a number of, in the United States, we had to shift very quickly to online sales. Online sales, as folks didn't want to go out and purchase coffee in public as much anymore. They were brewing it more at home, and they started purchasing coffee a lot more online. There were some members of cooperative coffees who already had a very well-established online business. And those folks held seminars to help train other roasters how they could support their online business if they weren't focused on that. And internationally, there were supply chain problems that we ran into, and I won't go into any specific examples, but but the cooperative was able to work with producers to make sure that they didn't lose out and that we were able to provide coffee to our customers. There was just a lot of exchange of goodwill and trust around those issues. Yeah. So.
And I know, Josh, one of the things that you said in the very beginning is you don't want to be in coffee if it's not sustainable, not just for the whole supply chain, but specifically the farmers.
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about, in terms of seeing the world that you want to see. I mean, what is the world that you see now in terms of the coffee industry?
I think there's still a tremendous the coffee industry faces tremendous challenges, right? Climate change and also the financial environment right now are very disruptive, and we're all questioning the sustainability of specialty coffee. That's a big conversation. It has been for several years. I think there's still a disconnect between that conversation and understanding that if we're really going to create a sustainable specialty coffee industry, it has to be sustainable for everyone along the supply chain and the producers first and foremost. And I think that through better connecting the stories of the producers and their experiences to the consumer, so that the consumer understands that they have to pay more for coffee in order to provide a living wage, what the producers deserve. They'll want to be a part of that movement. They'll want to be they'll be encouraged by that, and you'll have a larger number of roasters and coffee consumers, coffee drinkers, willing to engage in that story and feel good about paying a higher price for coffee. Yeah. So my vision, I guess, for the future, what I'd want to see is every member of the supply chain valued, and specifically the farmers, in a way that allows them to have a fulfilled life, not just a sustained life, but where self-actualized, where they have choices, they are able to improve upon their lives, and not just improve upon the quality of their coffee. The focus on quality is very important. It's exciting, but not every producer is going to be able to attain the qualities that we sometimes see, lifted up. And so we need to help ensure that the consumer is educated about the stories, so that they see a different kind of value in the coffee. And then we can find a place to sell the producer's coffee that may not be a 90-point coffee or may not be an 88-point coffee.
Yeah. And in terms of our next question is, how do we practically get to the vision that we're talking about? I know, how do you think we can practically get there? What is the next step that people can take?
These kind of conversations are really helpful because they bring together different people from a lot of different backgrounds to understand what challenges everybody faces. We exchange these stories. But I think that roasters, from the standpoint of a roaster, need to do a better job of learning for themselves about what's really going on in the coffee industry all along the supply chain, and then educating their staff and making it a part of their offering so that they're helping, not just to say like, oh, we know where the farm is and we know the farmer, but like make it a part of the compelling story that the impact that a coffee that you might buy at a higher price point is making to a community. And maybe get involved in some projects that give back to the communities that they source coffee from. And those projects don't have to do anything with coffee. There's lots of projects that are fueled by the coffee industry that are directly related to improving drying beds or building a washing station. And those are all necessary and great because they'll help the producer produce better coffee, get a higher price. But there are other ways to give back to the community too. And through the nonprofit that as an example, the nonprofit that Higher Grounds is doing that producer work with, that was started for that purpose, and other roasters from cooperative coffees also work through. We have engaged the community and asked them to help us to just, support projects that they care about. So in Chiapas, Mexico, it was water projects. In Ethiopia, it was schools. And in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, financial literacy. So I just think there are other ways that that roasters can elevate their consciousness all along the supply chain and then share that story with their consumers so that when the consumer is making a choice, they're voting with their dollar to try and improve the life of somebody who made that coffee for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, Josh and I got this incredible experience to be able to go on the single origin trip as well. And something that I think that we've been processing through is what a unique opportunity this specific conference is right now. And the timing of it really couldn't be more perfect, especially as we are in a new stage of the pandemic. And so something that we talked about in terms of the single origin trip that was just really astounding is that there is an opportunity, if you are a smaller business, open yourself up and make connections, because really collaboration is the future for small businesses. If you do not have a ton of resources, the way that you can do bigger and better things is collaborating with synergistic, similar-minded businesses to be able to do more than you could have done if you were on your own. And we saw that very clearly through the foundation of Bank of Colombia and the grants that they do, the loans and lines of credits that they do for producers who typically couldn't be able to get one. We saw it through Campesino and Urbania, being open to partnering together when they could have traditionally been competitors in terms of exporting. And really, at the end of the day, if you are a smaller business, collaboration is the future. And if you are a bigger business, supporting smaller businesses financially through partnerships, through contracts, is the way of the future. It ensures sustainability and diversity of product as much as possible. So practically, the next steps is opening yourself up, both personally and professionally, making real relationships where you actually know the people and you want to work with them, because they see the world that you want to see as well. And it's through opportunities like this specific conference, these specific relationships, and where you can take from here on out. The second thing I'll say in terms of how do you practically get there, if you have a cafe, one thing that I've found really advantageous is putting on either really big campaigns or events with partners that I want to invite into my community. So this is a little bit more of a historical example for me, but I think it was back in 2016, there was a bombing in France, and there's a lot of fear around people from the Middle East, and because belonging, inclusivity, diversity, and being a minority is very important to me, and I'm in a very white community, we decided to do a campaign called #NotAfraidToLove. Because we wanted to, if it comes between the two choices of do we love or do we fear, we wanted to encourage people to love. And that campaign raised $3,000 for Syrian refugees coming to the US. And what was really neat about that, though, wasn't even necessarily the financial impact. It was the fact that people who looked people from the Middle East felt much more comfortable in my coffee shop. We had a lot more diversity coming into our fairly white community, coming into my coffee shop. And I think that from here on out, when it comes to wanting a more diverse community within my spaces, that is the way that I want to go, is intentionally partnering with communities that I want to invite into my community and wanting to make sure that they feel safe in my spaces. And so all that being said, really just to hone in everything here is that, we believe that collaboration is the future. Working with other synergistic businesses is the way that we can overcome the large issues we are all facing in the specialty coffee industry, because even though I might feel my coffee company is semi-comfortable right now, I am to some degree worried about the future. And I know that the only way that we can do this is to do it together. And so I'm looking forward to the relationships that I've built with Josh and with everyone that was on the single origin trip and the people that we will meet from here on out. But I know that all of you have a specific story and a specific journey and specific relationships you are building intentionally. And so, Josh, anything you want to add before we go to Q&A?
No, I think that sums it up.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So if anyone has any questions, this would be a perfect time. Okay.
Do we get to call on people? Do we get to call on people? This gentleman right down here.
Is it Spanish or English? English?
Okay.
Thank you first for sharing your story with us. I'd like to ask as well, with the first reason you wanted to have your own cafe, the reason, and did that change through the years?
Yes. So thank you so much for that question. So his question was, what was the reason why I wanted to start a coffee shop? And did that reason change as my business grew and opened more coffee shops? It did change. So for me, the first reason I wanted to open a coffee shop was really to be a community space. What I loved about coffee was that it was accessible financially. $3 a cup or something of that sort. Most people could afford that, and they could afford that every single day. And so you get this unique opportunity where people come in every single day. They can stay for 10 minutes, they can stay for hours. And the relationship between staff and customers can be really organic, really natural. And so that originally was the reason why I wanted to open a coffee shop. But as I had one coffee shop, I realized that maybe me and my husband could make enough money to have a sustainable life, but my staff could not. So within 1 year, we were like, okay, we have to grow if I want to be able to have an ecosystem that can pay my staff enough that they can have careers in coffee if they wanted to, or at least something closer to that. It's now very hard because of inflation, so I do feel like we rolled back again because everything is much more expensive. But yeah, my reasoning changed from wanting to make a community space and be involved in the community in a very organic way to really wanting to create an ecosystem that could take care of its people. So yeah, but thank you for your question. So, okay.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Well, first, both of you for sharing your visions, your human perspective. And I want to thank Josh and Chris because they've been an inspiration for our business for a long period of time. Great to see you. So, I'm with you guys, but one of the conundrums that I find is how do we really make the emotional connection with these values to the consumer so that they also value the things that we're trying to sell at a higher price. So how do you do that?
So it's an ongoing, we still have the same question. I mean, we have a lot of work to be done to really, to make it happen. I think I will say first, compelling media is very important. If you're able to in this day and age, people digest, they're moved by short video, but you can also do long form video and utilize social media as a space to tell a more complex story and create connections between individuals. I mean, I would never have imagined that I would be able to communicate with our connections in the Democratic Republic of the Congo while I was sitting on stage right here, by WhatsApp or whatever. So you can connect your consumers to producers in the same kind, similar way. but we're still learning how to do that as well, in the best way possible. So in addition to media, we have engaged in a lot of events in our community that are like when we first started the nonprofit, it was actually called the Chiapas Water Project. It was only focused on the one project in Chiapas, Mexico, bringing water or helping the communities to build water projects that would that they could sustain themselves, that would bring water down the mountain instead of having to spend all day going to get water, so that they had water right in their communities. When we first did that, it was really grassroots organizing local members of the community in these events. Like we'd have silent auctions and have local musicians come, and then people would tell the story. And some of the folks that would tell the story had actually traveled to Chiapas, so they had a firsthand engagement. It was a lot of grassroots work, so that's not easy. We also have conducted origin trips, because that helps to create that network of people who are directly tied to the communities that we're communicating about. But again, that is a big, that's a big challenge. It's a heavy lift. But taking 10 people down to a community to learn about the coffee that they've been consuming makes them a communicator for the needs of that community for the rest of their lives. Like they don't ever stop talking about that. So, but in terms of mass communication, I think as best possible, putting in the hands of your producer partner the ability to communicate their story directly through social media, and utilizing that and communicating about the coffee. Yeah, that was off the cuff. I don't know. It's a tough question, and it's the most important question.
Yeah, no, I resonate with Josh as well, because it is difficult to know to what degree on a branding standpoint and on a story standpoint to highlight things, what's happening in origin, and realizing that most of the time it doesn't always connect in terms of sales or even just like in terms of like social media likes or engagement. So I think, and I'm also kind of processing this out right now as well, but I've kind of been in more of a mindset of like, as a roaster, I want to be incredibly committed to the stories and the farms. I want to have the transparency and the organization of information ready for anyone who is interested. But my responsibility as a roaster is just to create as best of a brand as possible that people are willing to spend more money on. And so it ends up being more of a branding and marketing strategy that may or may not include a ton of information on the story of origin, but also has accessible information to all that if someone does get interested. Because at the end of the day, in order for me to afford the higher amounts of coffee that I want to pay for, I need to sell a lot. And what resonates with consumers in the US, sometimes a very little amount I feel like is talking about the origin trip, unfortunately, and a lot of it is more like how cool things look or how hip things are, or if you've hired a PR agency and you are, on Forbes or all these other things. But with that being said, I do think that it's more of like when I think about other industries, people do not want to support organizations that they find out are corrupt and making bad buying practices, but they don't necessarily always buy from organizations that are like, we're spending this much more for sustainable living. And I think that when I take a look at that and I think about the specialty coffee industry, I just think about my responsibility as a roaster to just make as cool of a brand as possible that people are willing to spend a good amount of money on. And then my own personal commitment to the farmers. But thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Hello, good afternoon.
Wait. Okay.
Hi. Well, I am an Indian American, and I live in a very small community called Millersburg, Ohio.
Yeah.
A community of 3,000 people, but we have a big asset. There are about 33,000 Amish live around there. Mm-hmm. And in the process, we have about 3.5 to 4 million tourists every year, pre-pandemic. But post-pandemic, I think we are back up to 80%. And I moved there 37 years ago, and we barely had a pizza store. We had to go 20 miles to buy a pizza. Now we have Walmart 24 hours. And on Josh's background, he was telling about the cooperatives, and they were stifling a appliance store, and they joined a larger group, with the buying power, a cooperative. So on that line, I'm just asking the question, is your group closed, or they can expand, or we can join? Because we are just starting, we are baby steps. We don't even have a roaster. So my son-in-law, I think he met you on the tour, and my daughter, they met 5 years ago, they got married 4 years ago. So my question is that group closed, or is it open? And how do I approach you to see what will be the possibility of us joining it? Because we truly want to believe in this community concept. Thank you.
Thank you. The short answer is no, it's not closed. The cooperative goes through different periods of time where we're deciding collectively as a business whether or not to take on new members, whether or not to be open to new members. So we go through periods where we're not taking on new members. I don't currently know the thought of all the board on new members. We did just during the pandemic bring in two new roasters. But the first step is a conversation. And how do you approach me? We can just talk. I'd be happy to do that, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with the cooperative staff to talk about what the process is for learning more about cooperative coffees. The cooperative sells to non-members, and every member that joins the cooperative starts off by buying from cooperative coffees before actually becoming a member, so that we know that we start that conversation, so we understand that your values are in alignment with ours, and you can learn about the stories of the different origins that we're sourcing from, and what we're all about, how we kind of operate. So sorry, it's not a yes or no, but
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah. Where's
just got to get you a microphone.
Ben?
Hi. First of all, thank you for sharing with us your experience. We have a farm, it's an organic farm, and we try to do a huge effort to support all the community and try to be responsible, etc. My question is, when you have your final client in front, when you have just a couple of minutes to explain why your coffee is really special, not just for the score, but because you have all around an strategy, how do you introduce to the client all this history in just a few minutes that you have the client in front? It's a long story. Sometimes we spend a lot of time telling all the story because my father, my mother, my neighbor, and usually the client feel exhausted, but we really want to transmit all this information, but we can't find the short strategy, the K, to influence the client, tell why the coffee is really special.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Do you mind repeating the question?
What's that?
Do you mind repeating the question?
I believe what I heard was that the question was, aside from the score, how do we communicate the story of the coffee to a potential buyer when the coffee is, or the story, of course, like all human stories are long and complicated, and they get more interesting as they go on, and more compelling.
Yeah.
But you only have a little bit of time with somebody, and I think it's similar to my answer to Mr. Bob Fish. It's a difficult thing that we struggle with when we're trying to tell the story of the coffees. To boil it down into a short soundbite is difficult, and sometimes can't be done almost. But I guess we try to find the one or two sentences that get to the heart of the human story that's happening around that coffee, and say that first. And if I don't know in what context you're having those conversations, but if there's a way to add some kind of visual component, where you're having a short video that shows what it is that you're trying to tell, the story of the coffee, then that might help.
Yeah, I would agree with Josh. Like, I think that, we all have much smaller attention spans now. I'm impressed that everyone is still here, so thank you. But yeah, just creating those sound bites that the average consumer can hold on to of what's important in the story that's being told about the farmer and the experience of the coffee. I do think that overall is most likely what needs. And one last thing I'll say too is your company, it builds trust with the community that you're talking to. So if you've taken the time to build trust with your community, they're much more apt to take that soundbite and that story and have that resonate with them. But if you're kind of seen as this big corporation that's like a robot or something, you might hear that, but it won't resonate as much. So I think that's the important back piece to it too.
Yep. I think then, people talk about sales funnels where they have to catch somebody's attention first, and then you move them through different stages of developing a relationship. And it's the same thing. It hurts me to try and take a really complicated story that is beautiful in its full story and reduce it to just a couple of sentences. It feels cheap sometimes. It feels like, but you have to hook them. You got to get them for that moment, and then know exactly how the next stage of the conversation is going to go. To when you open up and start sharing more, then they're like, whoa, wait, what's happening? Really? And then you have them, then you can have a longer conversation. But I don't know, it's a difficult thing to do. Everyone has such a short attention span, and they've got lots of things going on in their lives.
Just all the TikTok videos, just like dance and stuff.
No.
One last question, maybe? Okay.
Can I ask you in Spanish because my English is so bad? Would I go translate back?
No. Wait.
Is there a translator to?
So, yeah, could you?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, no más?
Okay.
Okay, no más. But we'll talk.
We'll just talk after.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Muy buenas tardes. Soy campesino del departamento del Cauca, cultivador de café de cuarta generación. En el departamento del Cauca cultivamos cerca de 95.000 familias cultivadoras de café, cultivamos cerca de 92.000 hectáreas. Pequeños caficultores, por una tradición bastante larga, pero que realmente pues, el nivel de vida de estas familias, la mayoría es pues un nivel de vida muy deprimente, los hijos no tienen suficiente alimento, un alimento adecuado, casas en bastante mal estado, dificultad para acceder a la educación. Entonces, la intervención mía es, y he venido a este evento, pues con muchas dificultades. Soy aprendiz de una gran institución de Colombia que es el SENA. Ellos me han permitido la entrada aquí, pero pues con mucha dificultad económica, inclusive aquí en mi bolso cargo el almuercito porque no hay el dinero suficiente para comprarlo acá. Pero quiero, y he venido aquí en representación de muchas familias caucanas, es a tratar de encontrar personas de otros países que quieran comprar nuestro producto. Estamos haciendo lo mejor, estamos tratando de cultivar amigable con el medio ambiente, estamos haciendo procesos nuevos, tratando de sacar el mejor producto, pero me gustaría buscar la forma, si alguien escucha pues mi petición, de tomar los datos de las personas que quieran comprar en otros países nuestros productos. Le agradecemos mucho. No, es esa, que cómo nos podría pues, ayudar a gestionar ese comercio de ese café, porque acá pues se paga muy barato.
So after doing a whole intervention about the coffee producers that he represents from Cauca, his biggest question is how could you help him to sell the product with the better prices around, because he feels like the local market is not giving fair prices yet for all the missions that they're trying to have around their coffee.
I'm not sure, I still didn't catch it all.
It sounds like it's more a matter of how do we, like what any recommendations we would have in terms of, a smaller farm producer being able to sell at a fair rate, because his experience seems to be that U.S. is not willing to pay a fairer rate. So any advice on how to do that?
I think it's a collective effort.
Yeah.
I'm,
Yeah.
I don't know your specific situation in terms of where you're trying to sell your coffee, but we have to teach the consumer that they need to pay more for coffee.
Yeah. Well, and I think just to kind of piggyback that specifically, I think that, you know, our what we can do on the U.S. side is more teaching the consumer those things. But I do think the collaboration here for other farms in Colombia is being open with their information with one another and teaching one another how to create a profitable business. And so if there are things that other farmers like you have done, that's how you can learn how to be able to place yourself in a strategic manner to be able to sell to the U.S. And then on our end, we try to encourage consumers to pay a higher amount so that we can, we can pay fair prices across the board. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you to PRF.